So the purpose really of it is to create conversation. Um, you know, these days, I always grew up thinking that to have a polite conversation with someone, you always had to stick to the sort of Henry Higgins sort of thing of just talk about the weather and your health. But these days, with climate change and bird flu, that's quite a dangerous territory to actually go into. So it's just really thinking about what society and what kind of people we bring in today. There's research by companies done saying that people today are the most disconnected, communicationally ever, and it's partly to do with these things, and with the types of conversations that people have these days can be a little bit disjointed. And it's also just to ask you to really go with the flow with conversations that you're having with visitors. We've all done it when we're having a conversation with someone, be it at a party or a restaurant or something. You're listening to what they're saying, but then a thought in your head goes back to when you bumped into Brad Pitt in a coffee shop, and then you're waiting for the next chance to really reiterate that point that you wanted to talk about, and until they've stopped talking, and then you're not really engaging in that sort of sense. So it's just sort of making sure that we're all really thinking about how we talk with visitors, which again, I'm sure all of you have great experience with being in a conversation, but it's just nice to sort of to remind ourselves of that. So before I really start, I just want to say that it's going to be a story of two halves, really. The first half is going to be about my experience in art and how I look at art, and then it will sort of ease you into how I look at the Holburne collection. So it's basically to keep in mind that the things that we have upstairs, they have facts behind them, backing them up, why things are there, the context behind them. But sometimes it's just nice to look past that and think about other ways about thinking about the paintings and the objects that we have upstairs. Not everything has a literal interpretation. We look at the things and we see that there's a fact that this was made in this date and that date, and then you look at the context behind that date, what was happening. But then the sort of average Joe that comes in off the street, they don't necessarily know all that information, so they could be coming to you with all sorts of crazy ideas that aren't necessarily true, but you still are going to have those conversations with people. So it's just keeping your mind open, really. So we'll start off with semiotics. Now, have many of you heard of semiotics before? It's a new not a new way. It's a different way of looking at art. It's very much concentrating on symbols and the meaning of symbols. It's probably actually a curator's worst nightmare, because it's really looking at a symbol and not really taking much thought over the facts of the piece, but looking at the history of what those symbols were, art history, looking at referencing and those sorts of things. But yes, it's the study of meaning making, and it was sort of invented by Roland Barthes, who was a philosopher, and he's sort of the granddad of semiotics. But he really sort of came up with this he studied language and linguistics, but also was trying to put all of his studies into how to read paintings, and not just read language, but how to read paintings and imagery. So the sort of idea of semiotics really is that you're looking at the sign or symbol within a piece. You're then trying to find the relationship, which is the semiotics. And in order to find the relationships, you're looking for the signifier, which is the object itself, and the signified, which is the meaning behind that object. So you can sort of think of it as a tree. You put two of those together, you find the relationship, that's how you're reading the sign and symbol. So if we just take a little case study to begin with, the symbol of the hand. Now we all have hands, most of us anyway, and you know, over the years it has been used as a device that could you know, refer to religion, you know, the sort of right hand of God, or probably one of the most famous pieces is in the Creation of Adam by Michelangelo. You know, the sort of the meeting of two hands. It does refer back to that sort of creationist thing. Personally, in my own work, I was very inspired by Terrence Malick's film The Tree of Life from 2011. If you haven't seen it, it's wonderful. It's a very poetic and beautifully shot film. I think a lot of the critics sort of hit on it a bit hard for that. But the whole point is that he used hands quite a lot in that film, and the sort of idea of creationism. And I chose this still because it actually is quite beautiful. You know, he's actually got his son's foot in his hands. It's that real idea of you know, sort of the birthing, you know, of that sort of thing. It's quite a lovely image. And again, like I said, it's something that I've actually referenced in my own work, which is this is a piece from an installation, short movie installation I did called The Way of Nature, that was looking at the themes of life and death and looking at how you could represent that through the sort of the body and the things that we have on ourselves. So today we're sort of bombarded by a huge amount of imagery. You know, it is to do with the sort of technology that we all have access to now. But you know, it's on our magazines, it's in fashion, it's on our street. You know, the signs and symbols that you get on our street, they're all there for some sort of information. You all decode these things in your brain. And actually, funnily enough, I don't know if anyone knows, but the most used font ever is the font called Helvetica, which they did a documentary on it a few years ago. But if you look into the sort of the visual things that you're seeing every day that you don't necessarily register, whoever invented that font Helvetica has had more success than probably any other font maker in the world. You know, it's in our TV shows. I don't know if any of you have seen True Detective, but in that opening title sequence, it's got so many nods and references to what could happen. It's sort of foreshadowing, giving you clues to the sort of the detective crime. And you know, it's in our adverts and things. The symbol of the apple, such a simple thing that Steve Jobs created with the company Apple. It's such a simple, but now it's one of the most recognized symbols throughout the entire world, is this Apple symbol. So I'm just going to go slightly onto film, because that is where my background is and that's where I've been trained. But also I know that obviously we are an art museum, so I'm trying to focus on where fine art is referenced in films, just again to sort of get you into the flow of thinking about symbols. So we all know the lovely Ophelia. It depicts Shakespeare's Ophelia in Hamlet. And the interesting thing about this is that Millais, you know, he basically took the words of Shakespeare. It's never actually acted out on stage, this piece. It's all suggested off stage. It's all, I think the words are, her clothes spread wide, a mermaid like, and while they abhor her, so whilst her clothes were keeping her up, but eventually her garments heavy with drink, with water, pulled the poor wretch from her melodious lay. So, you know, that's all the words he had to go on, and yet he created this masterpiece that we have here. So, looking at the sort of symbols within this, you know, obviously you have the flowers, you have nature, you have this sort of presence of death that's about to come. But one of the most poignant pieces, which will sort of come into play later as well, is this red poppy here. It's the only piece of sort of red flower in the whole piece. And actually, flowers within the whole picture, in the sort of Victorian era, they went through this obsession with flowers, and they would actually sort of decode the way the flowers were arranged and actually have great meaning to the arrangement of flowers. So it all comes from this sort of symbolic meaning of the flowers. But yes, that poppy in the front there, it represents, the poppy historically in art represents sleep and death. It sort of has that red colour, sort of blood, obviously death. A direct reference to Ophelia comes in Lars von Trier's film Melancholia, which obviously you can see the direct correlation here. She's in the water, she's surrounded by nature, and I think the way that he used this as well is because he wanted that sort of overwhelming feeling of distress that the character goes through in this film. If you haven't seen the film, it's all about the end of the world, slightly. This planet called Melancholia is about to crash into Earth, but it's not actually as sci-fi as it sounds. It's actually a beautiful representation about the human spirit and the human consciousness, I guess. And you follow this woman on her wedding day, and she's obviously having all these human feelings of doubt and distress, and obviously joy. It's her wedding day as well. But yes, it refers back to that Ophelia painting. It's also in Lars von Trier is quite an art house director. He's also known for being quite controversial in some of his films as well. So he's not to everyone's taste. But even something as popular as the Game of Thrones series, which for any of you fans of Game of Thrones, it's starting back tonight. And I do not suggest Googling Game of Thrones today because you're just going to get lots of spoilers. But even Game of Thrones takes so much reference in its costume and the amount of symbols that they put in that TV series from the pre-Raphaelites, and that beautiful, sort of flowing garbs and the sort of scenery that you get there can all be seen in all of those episodes. There's a definite correlation to that. So, referencing is probably one of my favourite types of symbol reading. Edward Hopper, who is probably one of the most referenced painters in sort of modern cinema, he did House by the Railroad, and actually it was painted just after World War I, so it had this real bleak quality to it, as you can see. But that bleakness is something that Alfred Hitchcock picked up on, and he sort of did directly reference it in Psycho. Just the shape of the house, the sort of angle of which you're being shown, it all directly references to House by the Railroad. A more modern film up the top here is Inherent Vice. Now that's a film by Paul Thomas Anderson, and he directly references The Last Supper. There's been a lot of references to The Last Supper. I think it's probably the go-to for a direct reference to religion and religion in art. But in Inherent Vice, the whole plot of the film is all about a detective. He's a bit of a hapless detective, and he's going through this journey. It's a little bit crazy, it gets a bit wacky, but it's at the end of the 70s, and people have said that how Paul Thomas Anderson directs and shoots that film is a complete love letter to the death of the 70s in Los Angeles and the 80s sort of taking over. The sort of the rock and roll music, that sort of vibe of the American dream, sort of them being taken over by industries in America at that time, especially in Los Angeles as well. So here he does reference to The Last Supper in a bit of a comical way. I mean, you've got Owen Wilson in the front there. He's just a comedy in everything. And, you've got them sharing pizza and things as well. But it is a slight reference, obviously, to this impending doom, almost. Someone could die at any moment in this as well. Now, there's a painting called Jutta, and it's by John Cassier. I never know how to pronounce his name. But it's a direct reference note, Sofia Coppola references it in her film Lost in Translation. Now, when you do see Lost in Translation, you're thinking it's literally the opening scene of that film, and you're thinking, why am I just staring at the bottom at that time? But there is a real. It's the sort of the passion of Sofia Coppola. She loved the work of John, and sort of wanted to emulate that image that she always saw of his. He was someone who did paint a lot. This is an oil painting, by the way, if you can't distinguish. It's actually so photographic, it looks quite real. But he painted a lot of women in lingerie, and often concentrated on the mid part as well. But he was getting textures really, and it was in the 70s, so it was all about expressing a female freedom as well, which is something that Sofia Coppola really is. It's a theme in her films. She likes to, sort of look at that hazy quality of life, and you sort of wake up with this image, the start of the film, again with this bottom, and Scarlett Johansson's bottom as well. So Alex Coville's Pacific. This is one of my favourite ones to sort of look at. Now, if you take a look at the date, it's 1967. Start of the 60s. You had JFK, you had Nixon. You have the Vietnam War going on, and then you've got Alex Coville in 67. 67 is actually the date that the protesters of the Vietnam War, they marched on the Pentagon against the Vietnam War as well. So if you read the symbols within this, what have you got? You've got a man relaxing, shirt off, sort of looking out into the horizon, the sunset. It sort of emulates that idea of the American dream, that freedom. It's a real freeing sense at the top. But then slowly, as you look down the picture, you get this symbol of a gun, obviously representing war. And it's this real divide, you've got on the table, they've left a lot of space for the gun as well. Here, the first thing you're drawn to is the gun, but then you look behind and you're seeing this real divide between something quite violent and something quite peaceful on the top. Now, this is something that was directly referenced in 1995, I believe. Yes, 1995, in Michael Mann's film The Heat. Heat. It's quite a geeky thing. It's one of my favourite sort of action films that are out there. But there's a lot of meaning behind the imagery. The whole story, the premise is about a bank robber and a detective cop, and the sort of rivalry between them, and it's this sort of very, very intense chase for the whole movie. And Michael Mann references Alex Coville's Pacific within that, directly to Robert De Niro's character, because still in the 90s, they were still having very similar problems socially in America at that time. Obviously, the war had ended, but there were other wars that were then being fought. There was still an element of depression, and I think it was his, one, love letter to Coville, and two, just his commentary on America at that time. This gangster, this crook, who you're supposed to really hate but have these mixed feelings, because you really know that he just wants to be free as well. He actually says in the film that he wants to get out of the business. He wants to go and live in Cuba somewhere and just live the rest of his life there. So it's creating these sort of mixed feelings between violence and something quite peaceful, like a dream. Now the next slide, The Blue Boy by Thomas Gainsborough. Can anybody guess where this has been referenced in recently, in past 3 or 4 years, in a film? Anyone have any ideas? Shout them out if you've got them. The film was really famous for having a BBC interviewer get quite embarrassed on TV by the director. Quite a violent director. Tarantino, yes. It's Django Unchained. So, think what you will about the film. It's not for everyone. Tarantino isn't for everyone. But the fact Tarantino has actually said that he directly referenced the Gainsborough's Blue Boy within this frame of the film, or this scene where he gets to choose his own clothes. It's set up as quite a humorous part of the film, where he's finally free as a slave. He gets to choose what he wears. He goes into a costume shop, tries on lots of things, and ends up trying on this. And it just sort of shows the slave's right to wear what he wants. It was 100 years. Django is set in the 1870s, which is almost 100 years after the Gainsborough painting was painted. But he still has those ideas of wanting to be like the aristocrats that he sees in these paintings and wear this fancy blue outfit. So, let's go on to the Holburne's collection. This is why you're all here. The picture gallery and the stairs. So, referencing Thomas Barker upstairs, you can see a direct correlation to Van Dyck in the pose. That's something that, again, looking back at the slides we've just seen, referencing is my favourite type of symbolism. So this is just a direct correlation to that. But also in Barker's self-portrait, he's actually given himself longer hair. Now, if you look at other portraits that Van Dyck did, he did have longer hair in his older years, and you get that real sense of sort of pomp, I guess. And it's, again, you could call Barker an absolute Van Dyck geek, really. He really did want to be him. And it was after a trip that he took to Italy, which you can actually see. He's actually painting a scene of Italy in the background as well. The Dead Soldier by Joseph Wright of Derby. Now, this is a really interesting one. Obviously the story is you've got this dead soldier, and it sort of marries quite well with the picture we have of the deserter soldier we have upstairs. But if you look at the symbols in there, you've got the colour red in the soldier's coat. Traditionally, when you look at the colour red in art, it represents death and anger. You've got the cannon there as well. Now, that harps back to what I was saying about Alex Coville's gun in the foreground of the picture. You've got this symbol of war right in front, it's almost in the centre there as well. And then if you look in the background, you can actually see the red coats of the army behind, and it's not too clear, but you can see a horse and a man on his horse just there as well. So sort of giving you this essence that there's a battle in the background going on. But the thing that I found most interesting about this is the tarp that's sort of draped over him. To me, this sort of represents death. Death is looming over this man. He has just died. It's almost that story, when you typically see death and the scythe, they haven't gone so, literal with that. But you do have this black tarp hanging over this horrific scene as well. Sort of death looming over to take him away. You've also got as well the exposed breast as well, which represents that idea of femininity, which obviously just below it you have the child as well. Now that is also something that's really, really interesting, is that you have a child directly right next to an image of death. So you have this new life, this new birth, right next to someone's life being taken away. Our favourite, Henrietta Laura Pulteney. So, she's obviously very beautiful, very young, but the symbols that you can read into this, it was a portrait of her at the time. She was just coming into womanhood, and the white dress that she wears really does represent her purity that she has. She wanted to be or the family wanted to represent her as someone quite pure. You can see that she's quite angelic as well. You've got obviously this red and pink sash sort of dividing up her outfit, which sort of could, if you look at fashion and symbolism in fashion, it could represent this sort of transition, this coming of age, coming into womanhood. You've also got her reaching for a branch, reaching for a flower. It's a symbol of logic as well. They always say in different art pieces that when you do see a branch, it's a symbol of logic, which is one of the several sort of liberal arts that we have. But obviously it's that feeling of a tree being, the information and intelligence, and sort of this branch coming off of it is just one of these branches, and that is logic. You've obviously got all the nature around her as well, just sort of hammering in that thing of that she's pure, she's innocent. And similarly to the Ophelia picture that we had, you've got this really prominent pink flower as well, which does match up with her sash, which again just represents that idea of blossoming and coming into womanhood. Now the Dashwood family, the Oriel and Dashwood family that we've got upstairs, this is actually on loan, so it's not technically part of our collection, but you've got so many different symbols in here, just in their mannerisms, in their body positions, and in the things that they're doing and wearing. So you've got this quite strange passing of a message here. We believe that this man was actually someone from the military that was coming and passing a message in. You've also got a man with a hookah pipe in the background as well, sort of representing that very social side. You've also got their gazes. All their gazes are quite different. I remember speaking to a volunteer upstairs a couple of months ago and saying that, their faces don't quite seem finished. All of their faces aren't particularly thought of very well, especially when you get to this gentleman here. His face just seems quite blank, really, compared to the others. But I did a bit of research into what was happening at the time. So it was painted in Bengal. I think that's how it is. Is it Bengal or Bengal? I always say Bengal tiger, so yeah. So it was painted in Bengal, and actually around that time, about 3 or 4 years previous to this, there was the worst famine that Bengal ever had. And it's just really strange to look at this picture of this, the colonial people coming over and enjoying tea and having this social scene, when actually a famine that I think it actually caused the deaths of 10 million people happened just years previous. And we're coming over, and we didn't, but yes. The Brits are coming over and sort of still using this land in kind of and exploiting it in a sense. We've also got our lovely lady's maid soap and linen. Now this, I don't know if anyone's ever known about her gaze in this. This is the symbol that I'd really like to look at for this one. So back in the 1700s, women were never really painted with their gaze to the audience. It was thought of as not the done thing, really. A woman's gaze would often be away from the audience. It would be looking at the gentleman in the picture. But this woman's gaze is directly out into the audience, and that gives you a real sense of engagement. And just for its time, it was quite avant-garde to do that, to actually have her gaze directly at you. Now, there have been some rumours and things like that she was quite a saucy lady. I don't know if it's just the collar around her neck, but you do get this sense of she's really being quite flirtatious with the audience, with her sort of blushed cheeks and that really cheeky gaze. And yeah, I mean, even her hands, going back to hands again, you've got her pinky raised, which she is washing soap and linen, but it does hark back to that middle finger up whilst you're having a cup of tea sort of thing. There is a slight air of sophistication to her as well. Now we're going to the first floor and taking a look at decorative arts as well. Now, I just want to, but before we get onto decorative arts, I just want to say that obviously semiotics and looking at symbols is very difficult when you're looking at decorative arts. The word in itself completely, they were there to be decorative. They were there to have a decorative thing. It's all sort of quite, superficial in a way. But if we are it's how some people do think when they see symbols and try and think of a meaning behind them. So we've got the still life that's on the top floor. No, sorry, on the first floor. You know, it's absolutely quintessential still life in its format and its framing. But actually, a lot of the fruit looks like you could eat it still. A real common theme in still lives is that the fruit is always rotted or rotting or looks like it's been eaten, because still lives are commonly known as an allegory for death, the passing of time, and all those sorts of things. So in this one, it's actually quite strange that you've got all these sort of fresh fruits on here as well. You do have a watch just in the foreground here that can represent the passing of time. It's a very literal representation of the passing of time. Often in still lives, you'll have sand timers as well in there as well. When I was looking at this, I did think that this was some sort of sand timer, but it's not. It's actually a vessel that's been tipped over, which can also, if you look at still lives, one of the common themes in them and one of the common symbols is an empty vessel, which then relates to this sense of decay and something not being there. And of course, this is one of the paintings that we have, which is very dark. And I know I've had many conversations with lots of you about how dark it is, but I did do some tweaking in Photoshop and tried to lighten it up a bit. So I think it's a lovely opportunity to actually really see the detail in there. And I didn't see the bird on the top in the little perch. For me, I'm not quite sure what the bird means, but it's quite nice to have that sort of that knowledge that it's there, because often with the lighting that we've got up there, you can't actually see a lot of the darker bits in there. So the next painting I want to look at is the Judgment of Paris. Now this is a well-known Greek myth, and it's presented in this very medieval guise that we have. But it's the myth of Paris. He's fallen asleep after a hunt, and he's visited by Mercury and asked to judge a beauty competition. Not quite PC, but it's the beauty competition of Venus, Juno, and Minerva. And the symbols that you get in this are quite interesting, because you can actually, if you didn't know the story, how would you know who the winner is? Now you can you can kind of see that this woman here, her gaze is more direct than any of the others. I think if you really look closely, it's not quite out straight to the audience. But definitely these two women are not looking at the audience. Now, in the Holburne book that we have, when Amina took a look at this, she said that you can see that it's the winner clearly. That Venus is the winner because she's looking out to the audience. She's got more of a direct gaze and more of a engagement with the audience. You can also see by her feet, they're sort of crossed over, slightly awkward. And also she's got slightly blushed cheeks as well compared to the others, which shows a sense of vanity. Now, strangely, if you don't know as well, Venus is the mother of Cupid. And you can sort of see behind her, she's actually got the attributes of Cupid. She's got wings, which is very strange and just something that the artist wanted to put in there. It's actually from a German school. We don't actually know the individual artist of that one. Now, decorative arts, the funeral screen. This is probably the most one with direct meaning to semiotics and symbols and that sort of thing. But this object, you can find it in the collection gallery to the left, over with the Dutch paintings. But it's a funeral screen, so made for someone to commemorate their death. But the object was made to commemorate a child's death. Now, if you didn't know that, if you weren't reading the plaque, you could actually just see that through the symbols. It's two skeletons holding scythes, and the object of the scythe, the symbol of the scythe, can suggest cutting of the life short. So it's for a child, this spoon. And obviously death, skeletons, it's quite obvious sort of symbol for death. It's quite macabre, but if you're going to celebrate someone's death with some skeletons. but they do it in Mexico, don't they? That's fine. And also below it, when you have a look up there, they've got a medallion that goes with the spoon as well. Now on that medallion, you've actually got an extra piece, an extra symbol, and sort of it's this shape, but in the middle, you would have a child blowing bubbles, which again is just another symbol of this angelic child that has had their life cut short, unfortunately. The centerpiece in the table that is currently upstairs at the moment. Obviously, the Georgians loved to create lots of pomp over just the simple things. So this was a candle holder and would hold in this bowl at the top some fruit. Fruit was a symbol of welcoming, but traditionally, the most used fruit for welcoming is actually the pineapple. So that's why I've zoomed in here. So not often, you would actually get a pineapple in the top here, but obviously it's quite an exotic fruit. They wouldn't be able to get a pineapple quite so often. But it's the reason why you sometimes see pineapples on the gates of mansions when you're going in as well. So that's just something quite interesting to be aware of and to look at when you're outside as well. Now this I've chosen purposefully because what we know about Panini's the ruins of the temple is that Panini just wanted to make money, and he wanted to basically just churn out these pieces, make some money. You can almost think of it as like a postcard, really. But if you sort of take that aside for a second and look at the things we've got, in the 18th century, we had something in the Canaletto exhibition that Amina sort of introduced to you all, is that thing of a capriccio, which is when you are sort of architecturally lying in a painting, really. You're making up the scene. It's not actually there from truth. So you've got all of this. If you were to go into Italy, it's quite big, you're just going to wander into Italy, you wouldn't find all this architecture there perfectly. You wouldn't find this view that you're being presented. So it is a complete farce, really. And like I said, it was made just to make money, just to churn out, keep himself on the breadline, that sort of thing. But you do have this sense of power, really, on the right-hand side. This really powerful structure. Then towards the left, you're getting this really decayed structure, which could have some sort of symbolism. I would say that if you're an artist, I don't think you're fully just painting just to get them out and just to make money. I would suppose you're really thinking about what you're doing, and it is just a pleasure to maybe get some money out of it as well. But like I said, it has been proved that Panini was just, I don't know how many times I'm going to say Panini, but it's making me hungry anyway. Some things that I didn't get a chance to actually research on and take a real look at. But there's so many symbols in the collection that we do have, and I encourage you to take a look at them as well. Is obviously the cabinet, and that actually has loads of stories on the wood as well. All these sort of Japanese stories that it shows. These stories that celebrate nature. You can just see these blossoming flowers and all these sorts of bees everywhere. But the stories it tells, I didn't actually get a chance to try and find out if there were any historical Japanese stories or anything. There might be something in there that I might need to try and tap into. And also below the feet, you've got that symbol of a cupid. Now, obviously, Cupid can represent this angelic creature, sort of holding up the cabinet as well. I'm not quite sure why they wanted to place it there. Is it just for decoration? Again, this is the discussion I'm trying to bring up within decorative arts. Is it just decoration, or is there something behind it? We've also got the Wedgwood vases, which tell the Greek stories in actual, pictorial style around it. And then you've got the time clipping the wings of Cupid as well, which, when really taking a closer look, I completely missed that you've got this skull down here, which obviously is this human aspect of death. And you've got the hourglass, obviously, you've got all this wind, this sort of, the earthly elements all coming up from below them. And then you've obviously got the symbol of Cupid, this angelic symbol, and the symbol of time as well. So that's obviously suggested by the hourglass. Now, one of our favourites, Crouching Venus. You're going to know if Catherine's doing a talk on Wednesday about this, so I won't go too much into it. But she obviously knows a lot more than me about the sort of history of the Venus. But it's just a really good example that it's not actually the artistic symbols that you can read that can tell you the context behind something. Now, I don't know if you've ever noticed, but the Venus has some writing on its back, and it's actually number 35, I believe it is. Yeah, number 35. Now, when Amina researched into this, it's a French military mark of the French, Royal Collection. So, it's a French military mark where it got picked up in some sort of raid, I believe, and then went to the French Royal Collection. And it's just showing that just by the symbol of letters and words, you can actually find out a lot about the history of the object. It was actually removed from the French collection in the Revolution. Yes, it's just sort of giving you an example of something that's not necessarily taking that whimsical nature of an artistic symbol, but more of quite literal symbols that we have, numbers, letters, that sort of thing. So, thinking about your audience, this is something that I'd like to just highlight when talking to visitors. Obviously, with children, we don't want you going around the galleries like this, but it is really important to engage with children as well. And I know it can be quite difficult to get children's attention, to get their attention spans on the objects, especially if they're not that interested in the facts, that sort of thing. And it's just using distraction techniques to actually get them interested in the collection. It's not necessarily about the facts that they want to know about. So if we have a child running around being a bit of a nuisance, you never say stop what you're doing. You never say don't do that unless they're actually got a pencil and drawing on the paintings. But never say, stop what you're doing. Just ask them to engage, do something that's engaging rather than a negative of stop what you're doing. Just say, have you ever thought about this dog in this painting? They always love the animals, which is something I want to go on to quickly now. Jungle Book. This more represents the fact that we're having a Stubbs exhibition soon, which is about animals, of course. But obviously under embargo of the images, I can't show the images that we're using. But I do know the types of animals that we have in there. So we've got lions. Now, lions traditionally in art doesn't mean for Stubbs, because Stubbs had his own agenda on what he was painting. But traditionally, when you look at lions in art, especially in the Middle Ages, they were seen as a symbol of resurrection. It's why C.S. Lewis used Aslan as this symbol of Jesus, almost, to him, in the Chronicles of Narnia. It can also refer to, the zodiac signs of Leo, and it can convey some sort of personality to that as well. When you have tigers, tigers are a native of Asia, and actually you get a lot of tigers drawing royalty in their carts and things like that. So you often get tigers not as sort of being celebrated for their beauty and their stripes, but actually as these sort of slave animals almost. especially in the royal pictures you often, in India, you get tigers carrying chariots. The monkey, a natural trickster, a natural fun animal. And the Christians in the Middle Ages actually thought that the monkey could be seen as some sort of devil, as some sort of bad omen, because it was a trickster and sort of wanted to sort of just have fun and a bit of a Loki type of character. And a horse as well. We see lots of horses upstairs. Like I said, not necessarily the agenda of the artist to represent them in this way, but historically in art, horses were there as a symbol of power and a symbol of grace. They were the mounts of warriors. People would ride into battle in horses. But often when a horse is white as well, it can look like a mythical creature called a unicorn, which it does have this connotation of being quite mythical and godlike as well. I did find one interesting animal on a piece of decorative art that we've got as well. So this is the sword that we have upstairs on the top, on the first floor. And I had a chat with Amina and Catherine about this, and I tried to find desperately some sort of meaning behind why they have a lion on a sword. And I think we came to the conclusion that it was just a piece of decorative art. I was so disheartened. But if you take that aside, if you don't think about it in that way, the Holburne family had a lion on their crest of arms. I was trying to suggest that could be the case, why there's a lion on there. It could be the case that lions represented bravery and you wanted some sort of brave, fierce symbol on your sword whilst you're in battle to intimidate the other, the person you're in battle with. But no, I think it was just a piece of decorative art, which the Georgians love to do. They just love to put stuff that didn't really mean that much on things. Yes, so this is coming to the end now. To wrap up, I just want to reiterate why I think it's important to really open up your mind about the different interpretations we can have when not necessarily looking at the facts. It engages audiences. It engages young audiences, it engages old audiences. It makes for really interesting discussion and debate as well. And like it or not, it's how current artists think about their work. It's how current artists in all sorts of forms these days think about their work. And it's how critics think about work as well. It's this thing of picking apart everything and trying to find meaning. I don't know what that says about our society, but I think it's something that is important nowadays. So if there's one thing you take from this, I would really just like you to go out, enjoy, obviously volunteering here, but to talk to people and carry on talking to people, listen to people, and most importantly, be prepared to be amazed with the sort of results that you can get if you do that, because I think it's something that's really important, and it's something that I think is important to the Holburne volunteer program as well, is that we're a lovely talkative bunch that's open to all sorts of ideas and suggestions, whilst still maintaining the security of the collection and the professionalism and all those sorts of things. But yes, thank you very much. I think that's about it. It's just been about 50 minutes, so that's enough. Is there any questions at all? No, that's awesome. I'm going to be here, but that's pretty much it. Yeah, like I said, talk.